Hello, everybody, and welcome to the official 2023 Cancer Survivorship Conference. It's a pleasure for me to be here and for you all to be here as well. I am Matthew Odette, your MC for the day. A little bit about me. I am a 25-year-old cancer survivor. I had cancer when I was 7, Burkitt's lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's, and currently I am a self-entrepreneur. I'm so excited to be here. It's a pleasure. I never really expected to be at something like this at a later point in my life, but it's really exciting to be here right now and just to share this moment with everyone. So now that we are all stretched and calm after that amazing morning movement session, I have a few housekeeping notes to go through. So first, today's conference agenda has a full day of back-to-back sessions with short transitions in between. We invite you to take your own breaks as you need throughout the day, and rest assured that you won't miss a single thing because everything will be recorded and available and emailed to you or posted at the Survivorship Conference website later this month. We got that out of the way. That's all the housekeeping. So for today's agenda, it's packed with great conversations and topics curated by survivors, caregivers, and team members and survivorship experts at the University of Minnesota's Masonic Cancer Center and M Health Fairview. All right, so now speaking of survivorship experts, here's one that you may know. Dr. Blaes has many titles, including oncologist and one of the co-hosts of today's event. I'm pleased to invite Dr. Blaes to the stage.
So we are super excited all of you are here today. Turn it. It is stored. Oh, there you go. Okay. That's not part of my job title, is how to work microphones. So there you go. Thank you for all of you for being here today. This is super fun for us to see all of you in person and for those of you online. This is a conference we've been doing now for about 17 years. We've been virtual the last 2 years with COVID, and it's really a pleasure to see so many faces. I want you to take a look around the room, and I'm wondering if we could have a show of hands for anyone that has received a cancer diagnosis, regardless of where you are in your treatment. Let's see your hands. Awesome. And for those of you that are online, feel free to type in the chat box. And remember, who is a cancer survivor? A cancer survivor is really anyone from the time of diagnosis through the trajectory of their life. So welcome for being here. This is a community of survivors. You're still not hearing me? Okay. So keep giving me a thumbs up or some other wave about the sound. So I appreciate that. We're grateful for all of you being here. But survivorship doesn't end there after a diagnosis. I know that there are so many others of you on this journey as caregivers, friends, siblings, and welcome. We're really thrilled to have you here. So what about our group of professionals? Those of you that are working with organizations helping to support our cancer survivors, can I see a show of hands? Awesome. Thank you for all of the work that you do, plus the clinicians, the researchers, and our community health workers. We're so grateful for all of you being here today. Many of you may know that it's estimated there are over 18 million cancer survivors, according to the National Cancer Institute. And I'm going to show you a couple things about what is the University of Minnesota and the Masonic Cancer Center doing to support patients, and how are they advancing research. As we get started, though, I want to do one more thank you to all of our sponsors. We could not do this conference alone, and I'd like to thank them. A big thank you to Pfizer, Children's Cancer Research Fund, Lilly Oncology, AstraZeneca, Beijing, and the National Children's Cancer Society. Can we give them a round of applause? There are lots more organizations, as we heard with our sponsor tables, and I hope you spend some time today connecting with them. As you heard, we really have a robust agenda, and we're really excited to be here today with our breakout sessions and our primary speakers. In some of our pre-event emails, I want to tell you about a special announcement, and I'm really excited to announce today that starting today, we're kicking off our first ever virtual cancer survivorship walk. This has been a big effort of saying, how do we bring people together? This virtual walk is an opportunity for you to rally your family, friends, and community members on your own time and make a pledge to walk for an important cause that's very close to all of us. When you register, you'll be supporting the work that we do to help host these programs and make strides in cancer research. You'll also receive a commemorative item for your support. We'll be welcoming folks to join us on Friday, June 2nd, for a celebration recognizing events made on this virtual walk as we celebrate Cancer Survivorship Month. More information will come out about this, but I know I've been hearing from many of you, how does my family wants to do something? How do we work together to raise money for cancer research? Well, this is your opportunity. So as we get started today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the University of Minnesota and the Masonic Cancer Center is doing to advance the science around cancer care. We'll see if I can make the slides work. So I want you, even from the back of the room, recognize this graph. This is showing you from the 70s up through 2040 that we have a growing number of cancer survivors. These are individuals living with disease. This is individuals that are cured from their disease. And what you'll find is that green, purple, and turquoise bars, these are our older cancer survivors. So we have a whole host of people that are here today. But it's also work we need to continue to do, recognizing that this is a growing number of individuals. So part of this is with earlier detection, better treatments, and targeted therapies. But I think all of you know, and you don't need me to tell you, that we've known for a long time that there's problems with the care of cancer survivors. Many of them lack primary care. Many of them are unaware of complications from their cancer treatment. And it's oftentimes, it's a growing population of those that are living with their disease. So many of you who have received immunotherapy oftentimes ask me, what do we know about people who have had immunotherapy? And what should I be looking for now that I'm 2 years or 5 years or 10 years from my treatment? And as I mentioned, our population's also aging. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Masonic Cancer Center. And the Cancer Center was first established by the university in 1991. We're one of 71 NCI designated cancer centers across the country. They exist in 36 states. In the state of Minnesota, there are 2, and we're really proud to be one of them. But what is part of being in a cancer center? And really, cancer research is multidisciplinary. Any of you who have had a diagnosis or have supported somebody recognizes that it's our researchers, it's our investigators looking at new therapies, along with those looking at outcomes and survivorship that really work together to advance the field. We know that cancer care and research oftentimes is organ site specific, and it really requires partnerships. Some of those partnerships are here today, and we're really thrilled to collaborate with them. And we know that it's not just what we do in the lab or in a study, but it's really how do we take this into practice to affect patient care that all of you are receiving. So the Cancer Center, this is part of their strategic goals over the course of the next 5 years. And you might ask, well, what about those living in the upper parts of this state? Or what about those living in the inner city? Really, the Masonic Cancer Center's goal is to advance cancer care across the whole state. And they do this through that term, what we call our catchment area. They want to drive research through our basic science and then moving that into the clinic to really make sure that we have fewer people that are affected by cancer in the future. So I wanted to tell you about a couple of the projects that have recently been funded at the University of Minnesota. One is our 10,000 Families study, and this is really looking at how does the environment actually affect cancer risk. This is a team of collaborators that are looking at hematologic malignancies like leukemia. The state of Minnesota has a higher rate of leukemias, and they're looking actually at how do environmental risks like PFAS and radon and other environmental exposures that we all experience every day, how do these actually affect cancer risk? We know we have a team of investigators that are looking, for example, at HPV and human papillomavirus and cervical cancer. They're involved in advancing screening guidelines, as well as working with some of our patient populations that are very unique, like our Somali population in the state of Minnesota. They've used a new technique working with patients where there's actually self-collection of HPV sampling, really to try to reduce the burden of HPV related cancers such as cervical cancer in the future. Many of you are going to sit in a breakout session today with Dr. Arjun Gupta talking about logistic and financial toxicity. But some of the team of investigators at the university have been really looking at all the time and logistics you spend going through your cancer treatment. I see some heads nodding, saying, we know that there are time burdens, you sitting in the waiting room, you sitting on the phone with insurance companies, you waiting for the doctor because we're not always on time, and really trying to measure this and understand how, as we have advancements in cancer care with the potential for things like home chemotherapy and telemedicine, how do we make a difference for patients, for all of you going through this treatment? And in terms of our childhood cancer survivors and work going on there are a couple of terrific investigators that are really looking at pre-leukemia and risks for this in our childhood cancer survivors. Dr. Marcotte and Dr. Ventechner just recently published a large paper looking at the fact that there are racial disparities in the recommendations for surgical resection for brain tumors. And so if we understand this research, we have the opportunity then to make a difference in how we care for all of our patients. In the middle graph, you'll find a recent publication by Dr. Lucy Turcotte, one of our pediatric hemonc physicians. And what she's been able to demonstrate in those who've gone through stem cell transplant is that over the course of the last 3 to 4 decades, we actually see better outcomes with less toxicity and patients having less chronic disease, which is awesome. Part of this is we're using less radiation in those patients, but it's with this kind of research that we hope we can have higher rates of cure with less toxicity. In our bone marrow transplant group, this is probably small for the back of the room, but suffice it to say that there are a lot of ongoing work trying to understand how those going through transplant may be affected with frailty and aging. How can we implement things like strength training to really make a difference for patients? And then what about reducing risk or working with all of our patient populations? So Dr. Dana Carroll is a researcher that works with us, who works with a lot of the Native American tribes, trying to understand how do we recognize and appreciate that some tobacco use is part of religious ceremonies. And yet we know tobacco use can have cancer risk. So how do we work with our tribe communities to appreciate the unique roles that some of these things play, while also raising awareness about some of the potential toxic side effects. And as we look at the future over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, we really have set ourselves up to look at how do we prepare and improve outcomes for people equitably. That includes our gender, sexual minority patients, as well as minorities. We're working hard to recognize that the University of Minnesota really can collaborate and look at cancer survivorship across the lifespan, from our pediatric through our adult and aging population. You might be sitting there saying, well, how is all of this going, and what is the university doing to advance the science and cure more patients? One of the things we're really proud of is our work in cellular therapy. And while this slide is kind of busy, I want you to just recognize that there are a lot of projects looking at how do we improve outcomes for those with leukemia, lymphoma, as well as many solid tumors, looking at new novel therapies. And this, for example, is a cellular therapy that is really taking what we're learning in the lab, doing some editing to actually improve outcomes in patients with GI malignancies and lung cancer, and taking this cellular therapy into the clinic. We're proud that we have a new developmental therapeutics clinic, really taking some of these work that's going on in the basic science side and moving it into the clinic so that more patients are cured from their treatment. And we're really happy with this effort. But how do we do this? We do this with clinical trials and research. And we're proud to say over the last 5 years, despite COVID, that we've been able to increase our clinical trial accrual. And we've really been able to increase our research money to advance the science. And this just shows you the last 5 years. The Cancer Center now has about $88 million worth of cancer funding. And these are through grants from the NCI and NIH, as well as through a lot of other philanthropic organizations. We also work across the state with our Minnesota Cancer Clinical Trials Network, which is really an effort to try to bring clinical trials and advancements in cancer care closer to home. And these are some of our partners for that. But all of this would not be possible without all of you here today. And part of our work and our team that's here, we really work to try to educate patients about some of the advances in science, as well as other practitioners, our nurses, our advanced practice providers. We do this through our conferences and some of our educational series, and feel free to visit some of the booths today to hear about this. And we've also done this through some work with researchers across the country, and we're very proud to be a part of this. What I wanted you all to know, though, is that our work really is, we learn from all of you. We learn from you as you come and you tell us about your cancer treatment, about the toxicities you're having, about what's working and what's not working. And so I think as we get started, what we really want is to hear from a patient about their own experience. And with that, I'm really excited to have Mike Neeson to come up and to give us his perspective. So thanks, Mike, for being here.
Stand around. So I started to have some digestive problems in the spring of 2008, and that was unusual for me. Plus, they were prolonged. I started to have, just digestive problems, kind of bloating, just not feeling well, things like that. And it went on and on. And so obviously that was not something I was used to. So I went and saw my primary, and I didn't even really have a primary at that time. So I went and I explained my symptoms, and he said, based on everything I said, I was probably having issues with lactose, so what do I know, right? And so I changed my diet for a couple months, and the symptoms didn't get any better. And so I went back to him, and he said, explain again. And now by this time, I'm actually even having, the bloating, some digestive problems, some odd bowel issues. And he said, well, I think it's probably gluten. I think it's gluten, not. So I'm like, again, right? I'm a lay person, and so he said, let's change your diet again. So I changed my diet again. Go on a couple months, nothing's getting better. As a matter of fact, it's getting worse. And so now I go in, and it's August. And now I actually even have blood in my stool. So this is, getting, compounding, the issues there. And so he said, Mike, you're 45. He said, you're going to need a colonoscopy. At that time, the age was 50. So he said, you're going to need a colonoscopy in a couple of years anyway. Why don't we go ahead and do one now? So I said, fine, let's see what's going on. And so can I see a show of hands how many people have had colonoscopy in the room? Okay. If you haven't and you're 45, and kind of the Katie Couric of it, go get that done. Because actually the prep is not a big deal, and the actual procedure, you won't remember most of it anyway. So, but so anyway, I go in, and I have the colonoscopy, and when I wake up, you kind of come out of some light sedation. And I remember him showing me a photo, and he said, do you know what this is? And I said, well, I'm going to guess that's my colon. He said, yep. He said, do you know what this is? Shows me a spot in there. I said, no, it's kind of a yellowish spot. And he said, that's a tumor. And he said, I have every reason to believe that's cancer, and it's malignant, and it's anywhere from 1.5 inches to 2 inches. So, quite a shock, right? And so go home that afternoon, and my wife at that time was working in the medical industry. And so she got on the phone and started calling friends, colleagues, things like that, and said, hey, there's a good chance my husband was just diagnosed with colon cancer. Who do you know? Things like that. And she made a number of calls, and one name kept coming up repeatedly, and it was Dr. David Rothenberger here at the U, and he's since retired. But his name kept coming up. And so my wife called, and, fortunately at that time, we were able to get in within a week to see him. And which is surprising right now when you think about it. But so we got in, and he said, well, Mike, what we're going to do, he had seen the scans, some of the imaging from my local provider where I had the colonoscopy. And he said, well, we're going to arrange what I kind of call the alphabet tests. So, I went in for a CT scan, went in for an MRI, went in for a PET scan, and I got all those done in maybe 7 or 8 working days. It was actually pretty quick. And so, and a quick little story on here, I'll make it quick, but that's all new to me. And for a number of you, if you've been in like an MRI, I remember going in the MRI and I walked into the room and the technician, I must have had a look on my face because the technician said, "You gonna be okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I think so." She said, "You claustrophobic?" I'm like, "No." And she said, she said, "Well, you'll probably do okay." And I said, "Well, how do most people? What do they do?" And she said, "A lot of people actually just kind of fall asleep." I said, "Well, how long is it going to be?" She says, 67 minutes. I'm like, wow, okay. So, right, I get in. If some of you have had MRIs and any lengthy ones, right, you're like in a garbage can and somebody's hitting it, with a baseball bat. Except every 6 or 7 minutes, they change the rhythm and the pace a little bit, and I get out and I look at her and I'm like, no way has anyone ever fallen asleep in there. I'm like, I'm like, you weren't very truthful. And she tells me, because I'm kind of you can tell a little, with some levity. And she tells me, she goes, "Well, actually amongst us technicians, when people ask like, what's it like? Amongst us technicians," she said, "we kind of joke like, it's kind of like being in a coffin." I'm like, that's probably a joke best kept amongst you technicians, not with the patients, So anyway, I go through, all the tests and I go back and see Rothenberger again. This all happened pretty quickly, under 2 weeks. Go back and he's seeing all the imaging and scans now. And he says, and by this time I had a biopsy from the original colonoscopy and they had determined, it was malignant. But then Rothenberger not only confirmed that it was malignant, but that it was stage 4. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but I know it's worse than 1, 2, or 3, And so he explains that it's left my colon wall into some other organs. It's also metastasized to my lungs. And so, this, like it wasn't serious enough before, now it's incredibly serious, right? And so he explains what we're going to do. This is on in September. And so he says in October and November, we're going to go through a regime of chemo and radiation. We're going to do 40 radiation treatments Monday through Friday for 8 weeks. And we're also going to do chemo 7 days on, 2 days off. And so I said, all right, so, that's the plan. He said, then we'll have, you know what? I got to grab that juice because I'm going to get, I meant to bring that up. Thank you. So, he explains what the procedure is going to be, and then I'll have December off, to kind of recover, let the inflammation go down. And then in January, I'll go in for surgery to remove the tumor and also to install or create a colostomy. And right, so I get to look like, excuse me, this is going from bad to worse extremely quickly. And I said, colostomy? And he said, yeah, your tumor is so low in your colon that when I remove the tumor and the tissue around it, there's not going to be any muscle to hold in your stool. And he said, and I said, well, is that likely? And he said, no, it's 100%. So now I not only have to think about the chemo and radiation, I have to think in a couple months about this, colostomy, which obviously doesn't sound appealing, right? And so, I go in, I meet Dr. Chen, who's going to be my radiation doctor for the 8 weeks. And then I meet Dr. Greeno, who's going to be my oncologist. And shortly after seeing Dr. Rothenberger, we went to another medical facility that I won't mention. And my prognosis was extremely dire. And they gave me a finite amount of time to survive. So I went back to the U, went back to Dr. Rothenberger. And when I saw Dr. Greeno, I didn't tell him we had been to this other facility, but I asked him what a lot of you would. I said, what are my odds? He said, Mike, unless I can find a whole pile of 45-year-old people who are non-smokers, non-diabetic, really good health, he goes, unless I got a whole sample of those, he goes, I don't know what your odds are. He said, but something that always stuck with me, he said, but I'll tell you one thing. He said, your odds are 0 or 100. You can't be 30% alive. It was pretty profound. It always stuck with me all these years when he said that. And so I went through all my treatments, got through them. And then finally in December, I go back for an MRI. except this time I take some Valium because I am thinking, you know. So anyway, I go through that and I finally get some good news that the tumor has shrunk by about 50% from the chemo and radiation in October and November. And so, you know, again, I'm like, I get it, that's good news, it shrunk, but it's coming out anyway. So why would that matter? You know? And he said, no, it matters a lot because, you know, if the main tumor shrunk, probably these little seeds and cells on the periphery that are microscopic, you know, they were probably impacted too. So I'm like, okay. So now it's late December and I have to go in and get what's called marked for the colostomy. And what they do is they mark your kind of lower abdomen because they want to kind of see where the belt hits, where you bend over, things like that. Except they mark me on the left and the right, which kind of gets me thinking, why? But I'm like, well, maybe, you know, when they reroute your colon, maybe they put it on the left side, maybe they put it on the right. I don't know. But I find out what Dr. Blaes just talked about with some of the radiation, the toxicity. All the 40 radiation treatments have really damaged my bladder. So that's going to be removed. So now I'm not only going to have a colostomy, I'm going to have a urostomy. I'm going to have 2 bags instead of 1. So I go in on January 6th of 09 for the surgery. It's about 11 hours. Short day for me, long day for my family. So 21 days later, I leave the hospital. I go back home, start dealing with my new body. When you're in the hospital, it's pretty easy. People, nurses, things are taking care of you. You get home, it's a little frightening, a little different story with, you know, the products and the bags and things like that. But I get, you know, I'm pretty adaptable and I get on board and get educated and I start moving on with my life. And so I go back and I see Dr. Greeno, maybe it's the end of February, I've been home a month. And he asked, how are you doing? I said, yeah, I'm adjusting and recovering and stuff like that. And he said, well, that's good because we're going to start another 26 weeks of chemo. Okay. And I tolerated it pretty well in the fall, so I wasn't, you know, and he's a doctor, right? So I go through that. Now it's about April, May, and I actually start going back to work. 2 hours a day, you know, then 2 and 4. I'm gradually building it up. And by summer, I'm actually playing golf again, which to me, guess what? That's a big deal. And so I get back and I'm playing golf. I haven't seen a lot of my friends from the golf course for almost a year now, you know, because I was diagnosed in September. And so it's kind of funny. Some of my friends who I haven't seen, they're like, you know, how are you doing? I'm like, fine. They're like, how's the game? I'm like, fabulous. Haven't hit a bad shot yet. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, it can go in the bunker, it can go in the pond, it can go out of bounds. There's no bad shots, right? It's all perspective. And so I go back to work October 1st, full time. So I was out of work an entire year. And that's exactly what Rothenberg said it would be a 1 year, and he was right on. So from that point on, you know, I'm going, like a lot of you, early on, you're going every quarter, right? Every 12 weeks, you're going for blood, CT scan, oncology, things like that. So I'm in that cycle and things are going pretty well. And then about fall of 2011. So it's about 2.5 years now. I had just moved into my 6-month checkups instead of the, you know, every quarter. And I get a cough and I can't shake it. And sure enough, those really small, one of those really small nodules in my lungs from my early diagnosis has started to grow. And so have the CT scans, things like that. They're like, you're going to have to get a lobectomy. Once in a while I say lobotomy, but it's lobectomy. So you have 3 lobes in your right, 2 in your left. So I have the smallest one on my right taken out. And so now I not only have Dr. Rothenberger as my colorectal surgeon, Dr. Sean Elliott had taken out my bladder, so he's my urology surgeon. Now I have Dr. Maddox, who is my thoracic surgeon. And, you know, so, and, you know, I asked him, I said, hey, you know, I golf, I walk 18 holes 4 days a week, I bike. Is this going to be a problem? And he says, no, you won't even know us unless you're a triathlete or something like that. And he was right. I didn't. So I go in for the surgery like you always do, you know, 6, 7 in the morning, something like that. Surgery isn't real long. I am actually out. I go in on Friday morning. I am out Saturday night, which compared to the 21 days, this is like a picnic, right? And so, you know, it's 36 hours and I'm out. And takes a little while to recover, but not too much. And so now I go see, it might only be 2-3 weeks after, I go see my friend, Dr. Greeno, again. He said, how's it going? I'm like, really good. It wasn't anything like the first one. Actually, as I sit here, everything's kind of healed up, no pain, anything like that. And he said, well, I'm glad to hear it's really going well, because we're going to start another 26 weeks of chemo. Not only the 26 weeks as a LODA I had, we are going to start what's called oxaliplatin at the same time. So we're going to do 2 different ones, you know. So I'm like, okay. So we start those. And if anybody knows what oxaliplatin is, Dr. Blaes could tell you, but it's like a heavy metallic, it's super cold sensitive, you know, and we're in Minnesota, right? I'm taking this in February, March, April, and May. And I'm telling you, if you know somebody or if anybody in this room has been on it, things that are room temperature like this, you can't drink it. Everything almost has to be warmed up. So having that is no fun, but I'm telling you, in Minnesota in the winter, you sure don't want it. But anyway, so I'm taking those 2, and now it's about May. I'm about 3 months into it. And before I can even finish those, I start getting really bad kidney pain. And so I go in, see my friend, Dr. Elliott, and he explains, like all of you, right? Most of everybody in the room, you got 2 kidneys, and you have what are called ureters. They're like straws that drain these kidneys. Well, my straws or ureters have strictures or kind of kinks, tight spots in them from all the radiation. So again, when Dr. Blaes talks on this slide about radiation, and nowadays they don't do as much, I wouldn't want to have it again now, but my treatment would be different now, and a lot of this collateral damage I probably wouldn't have. But anyway, so these straws or strictures, you know, in these ureters, he explains that the urine can't get out of my kidneys and through these straws or ureters very well. He said, so we're going to put in stents. And right, I kind of get the concept. You know, he's like, the stents will keep the walls of these straws or ureters open and the urine will flow through. Like, I get it. And I tell you what, I worked at that time, I was working, and I golf with a couple guys who have heart stents. And so, and I've never seen one. But I tell Dr. Elliott, I go, I get the concept, you know, like a stent. And I remember doing that right in his office. And he goes, I don't think you do. He goes, these are 16 inches long, and we're going to change them every 60 days for the rest of your life. And I'm like, you're right. I didn't quite get the concept. And so now I've had those 12 years. I go in every 60 days. So I've had them done 80 or 90 times. I'll go in this Friday. You know, it's about 4 hours from when I'm in to out. Like I said, they're 16-inch long straws. They put a wire through them and they pull it off and then they put the new one on. But so, you know, you can survive cancer. Sometimes you come through it great. Sometimes there's some collateral damage, but right, you deal with it and you adjust to it. And you move on. So, you know, I've now been cancer free, not as much as Matt, but I'm at 12 years since the lung relapse. And you know, I owe a lot to the University of Minnesota. So thank you.
Thanks for that. I think when I listen to you, I think a lot about just thank you for sharing your story. I hope over the course of the day, many of you get to connect with each other, really thinking about, I know from feedback from prior conferences, that's one of the things people really like is being able to sit near someone who actually understands what it's like to waiting for a CT scan and what are things going to look like, and thinking of anticipating a surgery. And I'm wondering if you can just share with us a little bit, you know, sounds like humor is something that's worked well for you, but if you think back to some of those times, how you have dealt with that uncertainty and what has worked well for you.
Yeah, I guess, you know, by nature, I'm a pretty positive person, much more of a glass half full than empty. I think one of the other things too, when I got diagnosed, my wife and I have 2 sons, Nick and Ben, and they were 10 and 12. You know, you really have to put on a good face for your kids. And I was incredibly sick at times, but they were in school. So what I would try to really do is during the day, sleep, get rest or whatever. So I was really kind of at my peak, maybe from 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they got home till 8:30 or whatever. So, I just tried to prioritize, I guess, a little bit and really, just kind of focus on the future, thinking I'd get through it and just taking things kind of a day at a time. Because what I've talked to, I work with an awful lot of patients, colon cancer patients, ostomy patients, because a lot of the doctors and surgeons at the U will refer people to me. There's not too many people who are double ostomy patients like myself. And that can be overwhelming mentally, even physically. And so, and a lot of times, like for me, I knew, right, 4 months before I had my ostomies that was going to be a reality. So sometimes people have a lot of time to think about, and those aren't very positive thoughts sometimes. But what I try to tell people when I've talked to Dr. Blaes and a lot of patients I deal with, even when you survive, let's say that trajectory, from when you're diagnosed to when you are a survivor, maybe it's at a 30% angle, maybe 45, maybe it's fairly quick on a 60% angle. But I said, regardless of that trajectory, as you get better, on that trajectory, there's an awful lot of ups and downs, and a lot of the people I work with, I try to tell them, even one who's in the room here today, you don't try and get too excited when you get a good scan. That's great, but I always tell people, maybe don't spike the football. I don't want to kind of rain on your parade. But when you get a bad scan too, don't get too despondent. Because I went in and got scans sometimes, and Greeno would say, well, we're not sure what this is. I'd go back 10, 12 weeks later, it's gone. Maybe it was a bacteria or something like that. So, it's a long road. And I think, to answer your question, I think you got to try to the best you can is stay emotionally kind of level, not too high, not too low. Because like I said, even as you get better, not too many people I know, the road was smooth, right? There's a lot of up and downs, good times, bad times.
What about for caregivers? We have a lot of people in the room who support patients. Some have gone through treatment themselves. Sometimes it's a friend or a family member. And as I listen to you again, I think to myself, one, you've been a caregiver and support for a lot of people. But just when you've gone through all this and that uncertainty, do you have any suggestions or thoughts about what's helpful for the caregivers? What are good things that they can do to keep themselves well too?
Yeah, I think that's super important. My wife was with me the whole time, but she needs a break too, right? And in some regards, I think being a caregiver, they got to get away. They might be reluctant to, but you need to tell them as a patient, hey, you got to have a break. Go out with your girlfriends, do this, do that, whatever. I'll be fine, because they can't be with you, all the time. It's too draining. And I think in a way, as I reflect back, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it was tougher for my wife in some regards, because I was in control of my own pain and discomfort. But to sit and watch somebody, you're very limited in what you can do. So it's a really tough job, I think. And that's why I say you got to get away, get a break. And I think as a patient, you have to encourage that, and because sometimes they don't want to get away, and you have to tell them that's okay.
And another question is just, in terms of, it sounds like you advocated a lot for yourself. You met with some different groups of providers. Your team sort of grew. Your kids were important. Golf was important. Work. How, when you've been interacting with the medical teams and medical groups, how have you advocated for yourself that's worked? You've been through lots of appointments. You continue to have lots of procedures.
I think. Well, no, and you know what, it's a good question. My mother-in-law is 83, and my wife and I talk about a lot, because right at 83, she ends up going to the doctor for things. She's never an advocate who doesn't ask questions. That generation, my wife and I talk, we're very, very trusting whatever the doctor said. I've always been super respectful to all the physicians, but I'll tell you, we always ask questions, and we used to even bring a tape recorder in the beginning. Not for some silly liability reason or something. It was just because we can't always remember. My wife would say, well, I heard this, I heard that. So I think you do have to be your own advocate, and ask questions and things like that, because, you know, when I was on the 3rd round, I mean, I ended up doing 62 weeks of chemo. And when I was on the end of the axillary platen, I was really struggling, and I was on the verge of having some permanent neuropathy and different things. And, you know, and so I quit the Xylota right at the end. I had a couple of treatments to go. Greeno said stick with the Xylota, but I quit the auxiliary. It was starting, I was going to have permanent side effects. And, you know, and so, and he respected that. You know, he's like, hey, we've done enough. I think we're, you know, we're so far into it. I think you've gotten most of the benefits, and now I'll just say the juice isn't going to be worth the squeeze. The last couple of treatments wasn't going to really do anything except really some serious collateral damage probably. So you do have to be your own advocate, and, you know, I mean, they're the experts, but you need to, you know, listen to your own body too, right?
Sometimes I hear patients, when I've sat in environments like this, say they have to put on a good face when they interact with the doctor. And I think as I listen to you, think, no, really be honest, because we're not going to know if you're having these like worsening neuropathy or side effects unless you tell us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Mike and I met as Mike's been involved in different fundraising for colon cancer. And you've also been involved in a lot of support groups and advocacy. And any thoughts for the audience or things you wanted to share about that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, everybody has to find their own lane. I've done a lot of speaking around the country. I've had great opportunities, even out of the country. I've done TV commercials. I've done a lot of filming, just a lot of things that I never thought, you know, you would kind of turn lemons into lemonade. And that's not for everybody. I was telling Arjun Gupta, you know, earlier, Dr. Gupta, I said, you know, when I was diagnosed, right, the whole colostomy, urostomy thing, you're just thinking awful things, you know, and I don't know, as I deal with people, I'm like, well, do you really think you would walk around with a bag of stool 24 hours a day? I'm like, what, you know, it's empty most of the time, right? But some of the things, you know, you have to find your own comfort level of giving back. You know, some people get through it and they want to close that chapter, and that's okay, right? For me, it wasn't. You know, we've done a lot of fundraising. Like I said, I've done, the products I use are from Coloplast, a company in Denmark and here in the cities. I do a lot of work with their sales group. I was saying, think of this, their sales team is selling ostomy products along with other things, and they've never seen a stoma on a person. They've never seen, you know, even an ostomy. I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And, you know, and so I've been around the country to sessions like this, but a lot of them for ostomies and things. And I've changed my ostomies here in front of 400 or 500 people. That's not for everybody. You know, I get that. But, you know, you just have to find your own way to give back. I don't think there's a right or wrong, you know, but for me, I get a lot of fulfillment out of it.
Well, thank you for being here. Let's give Mike a round of applause and for sharing your story.
Thanks. Thank you.